can't outrun a disaster you created with your own decisions. The public noticed, and the damage is permanent.
Victor Davis Hanson declares he never saw this coming from Trump. It wasn't bluster or backlash. It was something else entirely.
Well, it's been heralded as a new order, a golden age, a divergent pathway, sort of reflects the Great Seal of the United States, that great quote from Virgil's Eclogues, Novo Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages. I think that's because of two or three things. Number one, it was the greatest comeback in American presidential history. Number two, unlike 2017, there is no demonstration, so he's won over or defeated most of his opponents. By that I mean the tech lords. That picture of Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Mark Andreessen, Elon Musk sitting next to him. The media is, they're reduced to saying that just a normal little wave by Elon Musk is a salute. That's what they came up with on Inauguration Day as far as anger or opposition. So, and the third thing is he signed over 200 executive orders, and he's got just 4 years. And so he thinks he has to move nonstop quickly every minute. So I think we're going to be in for a roller coaster ride in the way we've never seen before.
Trump, like many of us, said Joe Biden would wait until the last possible moment to pardon his family. Delay is the tactic. The timing is the shield.
I don't know what his intentions were, but he gave Trump credence of all the things he'd said. Trump had said, as many of us, that Joe Biden would wait to the very last minutes before pardoning his family. And he waited until Trump was actually giving his address right before he was going to be sworn in. Trump didn't know about it while he was speaking. But he did a lot of things. Then he just took away all the arguments, because these were not pardons, remember, of the traditional sense. We've only done this once in our history, given a preemptive pardon for not noticed or never charged. We only did that with Gerald Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon.
The left had been screaming since 2007 that Trump would call for something like January 6th. But when the moment came, he didn't. The script they wrote didn't match the ending.
So that the left had been screaming and yelling in 2007 that Trump had talked about that for the January 6th, but then he didn't. So they were just totally embarrassed, shocked. They were hypocritical. They said, well, maybe it was okay for Biden, but it wasn't for Trump. And then of course they greenlighted Trump's own pardons of the J6 people, and it just brought to the fore that he had no defenders, because he had vociferously criticized the way he was deposed. The Obamas, he said, were in on it. Jill Biden blamed Pelosi. He blamed Barack and Schumer. And so there was no constituency left. He left the presidency as a solitary figure. Trump was left under a cloud of anger and invective, but he never lost his mega base. Biden has no base, no defenders, period, not even in his own party. Well, those were aspirational speeches. They were, pass the torch to a new generation, ask not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country, Reagan, all of this, Morning in America, that stuff. But this was it was a blueprint of attack. He went through all of the things, from DEI to energy to the border and he promised, he said, we're going to end illegal immigration. We're going to end this misinterpretation of the 14th Amendment on anchor babies. We're going to end catch and release. It was very detailed, but it was a plan of attack we haven't heard. And you could see the faces of our former presidents. It wasn't just that he bitterly attacked Joe Biden, and by association blamed the Clinton-Obama record, but when they heard what he was detailing and promising,
the faces of Obama, Bill, and Hillary said it all. Oh my God, this man is a revolutionary, not a politician, but a wrecking ball aimed straight at their legacy.
The faces of Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, even George W. Bush, it was, oh my God, this man is a revolutionary. He's going to cancel everything that we did. And so that was pretty shocking, and everybody thought he would hold back. But he doesn't play by the Marquis of Queensberry rules. His view of the world is these people are pretty nasty people, and under the guise of sober and judicious language, they tried to impeach. They did impeach me twice. They tried to get me off the ballot. They waged lawfare in 5 different jurisdictions against me. They're not nice people, and I'm not going to play by their rules of it, and I'm just going to call them out for what they were. Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, more or less said what you just did. And I think for 2 reasons. The argument that Trump is making and Rubio is making is after World War II, when Russia, China were pretty much non-existent given the tolls of the European, what's now the European Union was flattened. We were the only, Britain was broke after their heroic sacrifices. We were the only superpower, and the idea was we had to indulge the world so that they could reboot. And it worked with the Marshall Plan and asymmetrical tariffs. But we are no longer that country. We are no longer preeminent, even though we're doing pretty well. So Trump's argument is this was an ossified, calcified paradigm that long outlived its usefulness, and now we are going to look at ourselves vis-a-vis our friends and enemies in terms of America first. And then second, his argument was, and has been throughout the campaign, that globalism was something that was asymmetrical. It enriched the bicoastal professional elite, the tech people, the insurance people, the finance people, the media people, the academic, but it destroyed by outsourcing and offshoring the interior. And he was going to be their retribution and say that we're not going to do quote unquote Bush free trade or Romney free trade or McCain free trade, to speak of his own party, and we're not going to have an open border in the way that the Republicans supported as much as the Democrats.
Even though Trump didn't attack anyone personally, the backlash was fierce, because that was the first clear outline of the MAGA agenda. The message, not the tone, was the threat.
Even though he didn't attack people personally, it got a lot more criticism because that was the first formal outline of the MAGA agenda, and that galvanized people to oppose him. But now, when he reiterated many of those points, it wasn't so abstract, and it was detailed. And the subtext was, when he gave that speech, he didn't know anything about Washington. That was his own confession. So when he came in, everybody rushed to him and said, you don't know what you're doing. We're the Republican hierarchy. You need a Rex Tillerson, CEO at State. You need a Jim Mattis at Defense. You need John Kelly at all these people. And their attitude toward Trump was, whatever directive that he issues, I'm going to interpret it as what I think is best. And in some cases, maybe I'll help him and transfer it into bureaucraties. But in many cases, I'm just going to thwart it. So it didn't happen the way he thought it would happen, the MAGA agenda. This time, every single cabinet, all 13 appointments, everybody from the NIH to the FBI, the first requisite is, are you loyal to the president, and does he have to worry about you subverting his agenda like last time? And the answer is no, we're all force multipliers. So when they heard that speech, they kind of got scared because they thought, you know what, this is what Kash Patel and Pete Hegseth and Pound Bondi and Marco Rubio and Jay Bhattacharya, that's what they're going to do. And now they know how to do it. And there's no opposition, interior opposition. There's nothing left. And Joe Biden has discredited the opposition. And even the Obamas, who were very prominent in this weird surrogate presidency where they kind of operated the gears and levers of the Biden administration while he was a waxen effigy.
Their lies aren't working anymore, and it scares them. When a regime senses its end, it becomes dangerous, very dangerous.
Victor Davis Hanson warns they're panicking right now, not because the system is stable, but because the cracks they've ignored for years are finally starting to show.
Sacramento State is one of the many California state universities that offer a 4-year program of education. It tends to be a little bit more pragmatic for teacher education, business, agriculture than are the UCs campuses, the 9 UC. And Sac State, as we call it, is near UC Davis. They're kind of twin University of California and State University campus. They have a new president. He fairly new. He was been there about a year. Dr. Luke Wood came from UC San Diego, as I remember, and he was famous in that area as a black educator who advocated a particular approach to the education K through 12 and college of black students.
The California University president argued that black students' test scores weren't competitive because the entire evaluation method was intrinsically biased.
A rejection of white standards. In other words, he believed that black students on test scores or GPA or by traditional criteria were not competitive with other groups because this method of evaluation was intrinsically biased or racist or did not take into account historical disparities, Jim Crow, etc. And so therefore, he called this term, I think, blacklighting, a kind of a play on gaslighting, that the way white people spoke about student achievement was intrinsically insulting to black students or had the effect of discouraging them, and therefore you had to have a different type of vocabulary, a different type of approach for black students in a way you wouldn't for other students. This is not going to work. We have tried that for 50 or 60 years, and we've seen that the Great Society specialization and fixation on race did not work.
Victor warns that this thing increased separatism, distrust, and racial tensions, turning a supposed solution into a deeper fracture point.
It increased separatism, distrust, racial tensions, and I think we've seen that in the last 4 or 5 years reach a zenith with the diversity, equity, inclusion. But here's my point. Dr. Luke Wood just gave an interview to a conservative black radio host, podcaster host, in which he said he wanted to eliminate whiteness. He was pressed on that question very effectively. And he said, well, you want to eliminate whiteness, but then that comes from white people. So if you want to eliminate the manifestation of white people, do you want to eliminate white people? He said, no. But he found himself in a dilemma, a rhetorical dilemma, an analytical dilemma, because if you apply that logic and you say, I want to eliminate blackness, what does that mean? You don't want to eliminate blacks. If you say, I want to eliminate Jewishness, does that mean you want to eliminate Jews? So what did he mean? He couldn't define whiteness when he was pressed. Apparently what he was trying to refer to, and I don't think he had the knowledge or the historical background or the analytical skills to explain what he meant, but he's talking about the dominant culture in the United States, and he associates that with whiteness because the founders, of course, were 95% white. They came from a British empirical enlightened tradition. But in fact, they were just one offshoot of a larger Western tradition, a Western tradition that began with olive-colored Greeks and olive-colored Italians in Rome, and it transmogrified into Europe after the end of the Roman Empire. It was enhanced during the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the British, Scottish Enlightenments, the transference of Western culture to America under the Constitution. What was it? It was an independent judiciary. It was a constitutional government, a tripartite, legislative, executive, judicial. It was emphasis on individual inquiry, free thought, the separation from religious thought and government, or the tolerance for free speech, the Bill of Rights. All of the free market system, the ability to make money in a capitalist free enterprise system.
Victor claims that all of this stems from a larger Western tradition, one that didn't disappear, but was instead amplified until it reshaped the entire debate.
The idea that the military is separate from the government. All of these ingredients were created in Rome, in Greece, enhanced, modified, rejection, reappearing again during these various stages of Western thought, and then they were transferred to the modern world, and most prominently with our founders. But it's not connected with whiteness necessarily. It doesn't matter. It transcends its skin. It's the only culture in the world in which you can be Chinese American, you can be Black American, you can be Hispanic American, and you can be as Western as anybody else. It's not predicated on white. So he associates this with whiteness, and he does that because he can't define it. What would he say the dominant culture of America is if it's not Western? And I don't think he can make that distinction. In fact, African Americans are as Western as anybody. All they have, it's just a matter of choice. Do you want to believe in consensual government or not? Do you believe in free enterprise or not? Do you believe in free speech or not? Do you believe in the separation of religious authority and secular authority or not? Do you believe in the Enlightenment and rationalism, empiricism, disinterested inquiry, or not? What's really dangerous is that you have a president at a major university here in California, Cal State Sacramento, who says he wants to eliminate whiteness. He's trying to inaugurate a Black Scholars Program. This is in the age of post-DEI and a very reactionary, retrograde approach that you're going to single out particular groups, and you're going to emphasize particular plans, programs based on the color of their skin at a time when we're all trying to transcend it, because when we have done that, it didn't work. It created tensions rather than alleviated them.
Victor asserts that it's a retrograde tribal thought that reaches back to pre-civilizational ideas, a mindset dragging modern society backward.
It created suspicion and distrust rather than ending such things. It's a retrograde tribal thought that goes back to pre-civilizational ideas. Whiteness, Dr. Wood, whiteness is Western civilization. Blackness is Western civilization. Hispanics are Western civilization. It's a choice of the mind. It's not the color of your skin. We are Western in this country. You call it whiteness because you're angry, because you perceive particular discriminations or unfairness in the system. The system says to you, everybody is equal under the law, only in the United States. They're free to do what they want. If people are systematically racist or prejudicial, it's a self-correcting legal system. But what we do not want to do is emphasize pre-civilizational ideas that the color of our skin matters more than the content of our character, and race is absolutely essential to what we are rather than just incidental. But most famously, Margaret Sanger, the creator of Planned Parenthood. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late Supreme Court Justice, remember she, in a New Yorker interview, remarked that she didn't understand the objections to, because she said, aren't we aborting basically the right people? Right meaning, I don't know what she quite meant, but selectively. So eugenics is a left-wing historical phenomenon, and it's very ironic for the left to accuse someone who's not a eugenicist, the makers of this ad, with eugenics when they could look to themselves and maybe in the age of erasure get rid of Margaret Sanger's association with Planned Parenthood. And so finally, a final warning or a piece of advice from Aristotle. React to beauty by proportion and mathematics, as I said. Beyonce is beautiful not because she's black or not because she's not white, or Sydney Sweeney is beautiful not because of her skin color, but because she has, as Aristotle would say, perfect symmetry. And that's a universal idea that translates into appreciation of young women with figures like that, and it transcends the hysteria and the madness of our contemporary racially fixed culture.
The people in charge won't warn you. They never do. Tell your family to prepare while you still can.
Victor Davis Hanson warns to tell your family to prepare, because these weird government policies are piling up fast and steering the country into unsettling territory.
I want to wade into a very controversial topic. I want to be very careful. It's the issue whether biological men who have transitioned to the female gender should compete in male sports, and what is the reaction of those who say they should versus the federal government under Trump's executive orders that said it's not fair to women. And the locus classicus, or the state, is the best example is now Janet Mills, the governor of Maine, in the White House said she was going to resist that. Donald Trump issued an executive order saying that all sports programs in the public sphere have to make sure that only biological women that remain women compete in women's sports, and the same as for male sports. And she's resisting this, and is the California legislature, and apparently Gavin Newsom, and are a lot of blue states. There's two fundamental issues we should all watch here. Number one, do states have the right to resist the federal government? Donald Trump says they don't, and he has threatened to cut off massive federal funds to Maine, which would be devastating to the economy, to force her to comply with federal law.
Victor asserts that when Joe Biden issued executive orders, people on the right took their opposition to court, pushing back through the system instead of the streets.
Note that when Joe Biden issued executive orders, if people on the right opposed them, they went to court. If they lost, they followed it. But this is a neo-Confederate idea that goes back to 1832 with South Carolina and tariffs, and in the 1850s in the South when the antebellum South said, we're not going to listen to the federal government. The federal government said, then you're in insurrectionary mode, and we know what happened. We have 600 sanctuary jurisdictions in the United States on matters of illegal immigration where they say we're not going to turn over illegal aliens that have committed a crime and are held. We're not going to turn them over to the Immigration and Custom Enforcement. The same issue now with trans.
Victor claims that Janet Mills may not grasp the full debate around the trans issue, but he argues that her actions feel insurrectionary in spirit.
Janet Mills may not know it, but she's an insurrectionist. She's a neo-Confederate. She is taking states' rights to the extreme. Rather than saying, I oppose the federal government, I will go to court to stop you, but if I lose, I will comply because the states are subordinate to the federal. She's not doing that. She's right in the spirit of the old Confederacy. The other issue, very importantly, is the trans issue itself, and I want to be very careful. Transsexualism, transgenderism is an ancient phenomenon. It appears throughout the medieval world, it appears in late antiquity, it appears in early antiquity. I can cite you chapter and verse from the poems of Catullus to the novels of Satyricon, of Petronius of Satyricon, of men who dress up like women, both as transvestites, who are still, I guess you'd say, heterosexual, but they have a fetish to wear women's clothes, or that who really want to be women. In the case of a poem or two, they castrate themselves. It's found in ancient history. And statistically, if you go back before this controversy happened, it was a very small number of the population, about less than 1% identified as transgendered or trans. Then it became, in the last decade, the next civil rights frontier, and all of a sudden we had universities where students were polled that 10 or 20 or 30% thought they might want to transition. It became almost a cult following. But in the process, we did something that no one ever imagined.
The liberal side had always argued that under Title IX, women should receive the same level of support for their sports as men. Equal funding, equal backing, equal priority.
People on the left side of the spectrum, the liberal side, had always argued that under Title IX, women should get the same amount of support for their sports as men do, even if they didn't make the same amount of revenue in football, basketball, etc. And America came over to that position, slow, but maybe begrudgingly, but they accepted it, and they promoted women's sports, and it was successful. And now biological males with a muscular skeletal framework have enormous physical advantages over females. We all know that. And they are systematically undermining women's sports as a civil rights issue. And the left doesn't know what to do because it's also an anti-feminist, anti-woman issue. But there's another thing to think about. There is transitioned or transsexual males. These are people born female with all the characteristics, muscular, skeletal, of females, of women, and they then either have operations or hormone treatments or both and become men. And guess what? When they compete in sports, they don't do very well. In other words, transgendered men cannot beat biological men, which brings up the issue. If you're transgendered, isn't there still a difference biologically, hormonally, from people born into that? In other words, if women transition to males and they cannot beat biological males, why do we keep insisting that males who transition as women are no different than biological women, when in fact we know they are, they know they are, and Donald Trump has tried to address this issue both in purposes of honesty and fairness and equality for women. And these state governors and legislatures that are resisting him are really breaking federal law, but more importantly, they're echoing and they're resonating the old Confederacy.
Victor asserts that it was all a plan to change the demography, expand social services, and push forward the broader liberal project through slow, deliberate policy shifts.
It was all a plan to change the demography, the constituency, to grow government, to increase social services, part of the liberal project. What do all these lies have in common? One, nobody's ever apologized for them. Nobody's even tried to defend them. Nobody's tried to deny them. Nobody's tried to sustain them. They all did terrible damage to the United States. It'll take years to find 12 million illegal aliens. We don't believe any of our agencies anymore. Our health agencies, our investigatory, our intelligence agencies. And finally, it destroyed the media. No one believes any of the legacy media. They promulgated and advanced all of these 5 ruses. They never apologized. They made fun of anybody who questioned them. And then now we're supposed to shrug and say, you were right, they were all lies, we forgive you. No, we don't. We don't. These lies did terrible damage to the United States, and the people who were responsible for them have never apologized. I want to talk today about this sudden phenomenon of now they tell us. I don't know if you've noticed, everyone, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, they all knew about Joe Biden's dementia. Suddenly we're given all of these revealing quotes that he was completely physically and mentally unfit to carry out the oath of office. But we all knew that. People had been writing about it. And yet when you wrote about it, you were called a cheat faker. You were ageist, and now they're just telling us, no, it was all a cover-up. It was all a conspiracy. You were right all along, you people. He was demented and challenged. All of these things demand the question, why now? Why all of a sudden are we no longer crazy that Joe Biden was not fit as a fiddle, that the quarantine was a mess, that Brett Kavanaugh was not that there's more to January 6th than we're told. And I could go on and on about these 11th hour revelations. It's either A, they're afraid there's going to be an accounting very quickly from the Trump administration, and they know that they had done things that were not just ethical, but perhaps illegal. Number 2, it also could be that in time, and they are opportunists, most of these people that I talk about, they see the national mood changing, that we're at peak woke, and the reputation of the FBI or the NEIH or journalism in general is at an all-time nadir. Or maybe it's something even more dramatic, like if I were Donald Trump and his team, and we had lied and done all of these things, and I was now in power, I know what I would do to people like myself. So it's a projection that they have culpable a feeling of culpability and exposure, and now they're trying to get everything out before there's an accounting.